Hello there. I have here a magnificent book called Rip Rap and Cold Mountain Poems by Gary Snyder. If you don't know who Gary Snyder is, he was pretty cool. He was one of the beats like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, all those guys. And what he was about was mainly Zen Buddhism, but also just kind of bringing a lot of these Buddhist ideas to America, I guess mainly San Francisco. So he's one of the primary movers in that movement. And what I want to read is not Rip Rap, but Cold Mountain Poems, which is kind of the second half-ish of the book. And what Cold Mountain Poems are a translation of a collection of 20-something poems, 24 poems written by an old Chinese madman named Han-Shan. And Han-Shan actually means cold mountain. And Han-Shan was essentially a Taoist monk and hermit who lived up in some mountain range in China. And I could give a nice introduction about Han-Shan himself, but I'll just let Gary Snyder's introduction speak for itself because it's pretty concise and it's pretty cute. Pretty cute. So here we go. Han-Shan, Cold Mountain, takes his name from where he lived. He is a mountain madman in an old Chinese line of ragged hermits. When he talks about Cold Mountain, he means himself, his home, his state of mind. He lived in the Tang Dynasty, traditionally 627 to 650, although Hu Shi, whoever that is, dates him 700 to 780. This makes him roughly contemporary with Tu Fu, Li Po, Wang Wei, and Po Chui, whoever those guys are. His poems, of which 300 survive, are written in Tang colloquial, rough and fresh. The ideas are Taoist, Buddhist, Zen. He and his sidekick, Shi Te, became great favorites with Zen painters of later days, the scroll, the broom, the wild hair, and laughter. They became immortals, and you sometimes run onto them today in the skid rows, orchards, hobo jungles, and logging camps of America. So that's Han-Shan and his introduction by Gary Snyder, who actually translated the poems. Now, a few more introductory remarks, and I'll have like little bits in the description where you can skip along the video if you're tired of my introductory remarks. Gary Snyder translated these poems from the Chinese, I think. It might have been Japanese, but I'm pretty sure it was Chinese. And actually the poems themselves weren't originally written on transcripts or manuscripts or whatever. I think there's a preface to the poems by Lu Qiuyin, governor of Tai Prefecture. And I think, from what I gather, that this was a Buddhist man who actually came and encountered Han-Shan and engaged in dialogue and interaction with him. And I'll just read the final sentence of his introduction. It says, "I hold to the principle of the Buddha mind. It is fortunate to meet with men of Tao, so I have made this eulogy." And so essentially this is a Buddhist who came upon this Taoist man, and so this kind of set of poetry represents an intersection of Buddhism and Taoism that I think is probably somewhat central, or at least representative of the intersection of Buddhism and Taoism during the kind of formulation of Chan Buddhism, which becomes Zen Buddhism. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but who knows? Another thing, this book itself was given to me by my professor, an old professor of mine, Dr. Komiyati, who is a Taoist scholar practitioner. So he's one of the leading scholars of Taoism, and he's also an ordained Taoist priest. And so he's part of a particular lineage. I forget which one. It might be Kwanzaa. I don't know. I don't want to throw it out there. But anyway, the point is, he is part of a particular actual Taoist lineage, and this book belonged to him. And so that in some sense, this is like a Taoist scripture that is in itself imbued with that Taoist lineage that he himself carried and embodied in his own being. And this embodiment of that lineage was handed to me. And without getting too detailed, I think my own intellectual path and lineage was quite influenced by this professor, who was quite an inspiration when I was studying with him. And that's not to say that I consider myself part of his own lineage. I kind of have my own lineage, but there is some kind of metaphysical intersection of lineages here, which is quite beautiful. And so that's just something to be aware of as you hear these words. Like the interpretations that I'm going to give are kind of speaking on behalf of my own lineage as it intersects with his lineage, as it intersects with the lineage of Gary Snyder, and all of these lineages that human beings embody individually are kind of speaking through these words, and I'm becoming kind of a vessel of some sort. If you agree with that mode of perception. If not, then that's all right. Just hear the words, hear the interpretations. So I guess I'll go with the first poem, and I'll just read as many of them as I feel like, and I'll probably do multiple videos. But without further ado, here is the first poem. The path to Han-Shan's place is laughable. A path, but no sign of cart or horse. Converging gorges, hard to trace their twists, jumbled cliffs, unbelievably rugged. 1,000 grasses bend with dew, a hill of pines hums in the wind. And now, I've lost the shortcut home. Body asking shadow, how do you keep up? The path to Han-Shan's place is laughable. A path, but no sign of cart or horse. So he's talking about the path to Cold Mountain, to Han-Shan. And so here, Cold Mountain represents the actual mountains that he went and wandered into, but also the path into the inner mountain, into the inner sanctum of the mountains that exists in this kind of higher meditative mind space, mindscape, mind state. So the path is laughable. It's kind of an absurd one. It invokes laughter, the kind of blissful laughter of joy and pure innocence. And there's no sign of cart or horse. You can't use the machinations of the mundane world, the comforts that society has to offer that make things easier. There's no easier way. There's no easy way to get to Cold Mountain. You have to put in a lot of work. And so throughout all of these poems, he's operating on this simultaneously metaphorical and literal level. And he's talking about the mountains themselves as this rugged terrain, converging gorges, unbelievably rugged, but also as this inner microcosmic terrain of the meditative mind space as this actual mountainous landscape, So that ties into at least what I have learned about Taoism, where the macrocosm and the microcosm are interwoven in this sense, where there are mountains in the real world and there are mountains within the body that can be explored and sauntered along by deep meditative practitioners. But the point of this is no joke. This is an extremely difficult thing to achieve, and if you're not ready to renounce a lot of the pleasures that the material world has to offer, then you're probably going to get lost and you're going to go insane or something. 1,000 grasses bend with dew, a hill of pines hums in the wind. And so 1,000 grasses shows that he's surrounded by the vast diversity, biodiversity of all of these, of just the earthly vegetation that he's surrounded by. And they bend with dew, little dewdrops that hang on that vegetation, little orbs of water that reflect and embody microcosmically the entire surrounding world. I don't know if you've ever seen that dew that really reflects everything around it and creates kind of a little microcosmic dome. That's the image that's conjured in my mind. And the hill of pines that hums in the wind, you hear the pines themselves, the trees themselves, the forest and the mountains speaking through the wind in the silent hum of the eternal processual streams of nature going about its seasonal changes. It's something that you don't hear in the city because there's too much noise and too much going along about business that isn't quite so important. But maybe that's not in the words themselves. And now I've lost the shortcut home. Body asking shadow, how do you keep up? There are no shortcuts on this path. There are no shortcuts in the mountains themselves. There's no shortcut to enlightenment and to the meditative space that he is seeking through his practice. Body asking shadow, how do you keep up? That is an absolutely beautiful line, and I quite frankly don't know what to make of it. But the shadow could represent so many things. I don't think the Platonic shadow applies here. It's not supposed to, that's for sure. But when I see shadow, I think Plato. And that's probably problematic. You don't want to bring Western interpretation to an Eastern concept or something. But you could think of him actually walking along the mountains themselves and seeing his actual shadow, because he's operating on that literal and metaphorical level. And his body itself is engaging in this more sinuous, more interconnected perception of the surroundings and environs. And so how does the shadow, which throughout all this process of wandering morphs, how does it stay attached to the body, so to speak? A little golden beetle, like the Jungian one, just flew over here to confirm this theory. But I'm not sure. That's one that I would love if anyone has any thoughts on that one. Please share your thoughts. Body asking shadow, how do you keep up? Second poem. In a tangle of cliffs, I chose a place. Bird paths, but no trails for men. What's beyond the yard? White clouds clinging to vague rocks. Now I've lived here, how many years? Again and again, spring and winter pass. Go tell families with silverware and cars. What's the use of all that noise and money? So in a tangle of cliffs, I chose a place. Bird paths, but no trails for men. So literally, among some cliffs, he built his little hut where he would kind of set his meditative roots. And in that area, there were no trails. So it's somewhere where very few, if any, human beings have ever wandered. He found his own little nook in the mountains. And that is the experience of the hermit. If you're any kind of hermit, whether Taoist or Buddhist or Christian or Muslim or anything, you might have had that experience where you go deep, very deep into the mountains, where there are no trails for men, only bird paths, only ways to fly with your mind, so to speak. And when he says bird paths, that seems, and I don't know, this is a translation, so who knows exactly what he was saying in the Chinese, but I have the English words and I'm not fluent in Chinese, so we do what we can. But when I hear the word bird paths, it seems to imply that in this place that he chose, he became in tune with the actual paths of the birds. You could imagine that the birds themselves, who are flying invisibly through the air, so to speak, or leaving invisible traces through the air, once you attain that kind of higher mode of perception of the meditative cold mountain state, then you start to notice the energetic traces of subtle energy, of qi, that the birds themselves kind of wander upon. And this is interesting because we know that birds follow some kind of magnetic perception of reality. And so maybe he's getting in tune, this is pure speculation, I guess, with that more magnetic, at very least chi-oriented reality. And he's seeing how the birds are following these paths. They're not just flying randomly through the air, as most people in the city would think. They actually have their paths, just like we have trails in the mountains. They've learned to navigate and pave these paths through the air. What's beyond the yard? Is he talking about his yard, his backyard, his little garden or something? Is he talking about the vast expanse? Is he talking about the earth itself? What is beyond it? White clouds clinging to vague rocks. So he's up in the mountains, and what he sees beyond the yard is white clouds clinging to vague rocks, to rocks that have these formations that are kind of vague. You can't really give them a particular confined definition or something. And the white clouds, since he's so high up, he's pretty much in the sky, in the clouds, they're clinging to these rocks. They're part of the ecosystem. And if you've been in the mountains and you've seen this, you know what he means. When the cloud comes in, it seems to like hug the rocks themselves. And maybe you've even had the chance of being surrounded by the cloud, by the fog inside of the mountain, where it's just pure whiteness everywhere, and you can't see more than like 1 or 2 meters around you. Now I've lived here how many years? Again and again, spring and winter pass. So he's lost kind of this linear concept of time. Maybe he's still in some linear concept of time, but time has become an infinitesimal process. Years themselves, which are such long periods of time for so many people who live down below in the cities, to him it's nothing. It's just the vast processual stream of the Tao, of nature, unfolding about its ways. Again and again, spring and winter pass. The seasons come and go as if they were mere moments in the eternity of the universe. And when he achieves that kind of supratemporal perception of reality, and he's flowing in that state of being, he says this: "Go tell families with silverware and cars, what's the use of all that noise and money?" So once you kind of walk on that path into Cold Mountain, and you achieve this supratemporal perception of reality that is more in tune with the eternality of the universe itself and the way that it streams into its own becoming, you realize that silverware and cars, these things that society holds valuable, like silverware, shiny objects, that bring comfort and satisfaction and excitement, and cars that bring convenience, that make things easier. What's the use of all that noise and money? What does it actually do? Does it actually serve any purpose? Does it actually bring any satisfaction? Or is it just completely empty? Is it just destined to fade into the eternal mists of time? Does it leave a void within the heart and soul? That's the whole point of his final statement. So the point is, you got to abandon these material comforts and pleasures and just go into the mountains and breathe that purest of air and dwell with the clouds and dwell in that supratemporal understanding of reality and time, and seeing that we, as say we live about an average of 80 years, we are mere fragments of that eternal time in face of the infinitude of the whole universe. So this is the third one. And I don't know, this might be the last one I read here. We'll see. And the next videos might be other locations. In the mountains, it's cold. Always been cold, not just this year. Jagged scarps forever snowed in. Woods in the dark ravines, spitting mist. Grass is still sprouting at the end of June. Leaves begin to fall in early August. And here am I, high on mountains, peering and peering, but I can't even see the sky. In the mountains, it's cold, always been cold, not just this year. So he's actually just referring to how cold it is in those mountains. And this is like the coldest area, that these high mountains, not just necessarily his mountains, but mountains and mountaintops are the coldest areas in the world, and except maybe the Arctic and Antarctic circles. But you know what I mean, like he's surrounded by the frozen frost that is kind of like the source of life on Earth to some extent, because the glaciers are the ones that feed the streams, that feed the lakes and oceans and whatnot. You could argue the oceans feed because blah, 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 but the point is, he's in a very cold space, and that also refers to his meditative space, because it's extremely difficult to be there. Jagged scarps forever snowed in, forever in the snow. It's always cold there. Woods in the dark ravines, spitting mist. If you've ever seen that, the mist rising from the valleys down below and the ravines, and it's kind of, it has kind of an ominous feel to it. Right now he's describing moments in his practice where it's cold and difficult. Grass is still sprouting at the end of June. Leaves begin to fall in early August. This is a very rough terrain out here. And here am I, high on mountains. He is, I think high on mountains is probably chosen as a particular translation here. But I don't know, again, I'm not fluent in Chinese. I wish I was and had it. But he's absorbing, breathing in this mountainous energy, perhaps this cold energy. And he is, it's altering his state of consciousness. Peering and peering, but I can't even see the sky. And that peering and peering to me suggests that he's practicing and practicing and practicing. He's going about his meditations. He's going about his writing. He's reading scripture. He's going about just living in this unbelievably rugged terrain. And in spite of it all, he can't see the sky. He can't see the kind of enlightenment, the final enlightenment that he's presumably after. Like he's practicing and practicing, but it still doesn't come. In spite of the fact that he's been in there for years and years, it will take another eternity of time in order to actually achieve some kind of like perfect, undefiled union with the sacred source of reality. In this case, probably the Tao, but just the source, the creation, the creator, the high, the most sacred, the most high, so to speak. So it's extremely difficult. Extremely, extremely difficult.